Hello, amazing listeners. We are here today to talk about sex negativity and how to freaking unlearn it. This is like why I have a job. So we're going to talk about, sex education kind of sucking and falling short. What does sex negativity even mean? What is sex positivity? We're going to get into some thought model stuff. And I'm going to kick it off by telling you some of the messages I got growing up about sex and what is sexy. One of the first memories I have is, I think I was 4 in preschool, and I would run around after this boy who I thought was really cute. And my friend also thought he was cute. And I think we both ran around after him and tried to kiss him. And it's really interesting, now at 42 to think back to when I was 4 and to see that there was no self-consciousness. There was no sort of internalized idea of playing games when you like someone. Yeah, like that stuff hadn't come. There was no gender role sort of internalization about, a guy should probably initiate most of the time, right? And there was just a sense of confidence in, my little being and who I was and going for what I want. Now, consent is also important. I actually think that should be taught at a very young age. Don't just chase people and try to pin them and kiss them without their consent. So 4-year-old me still has some stuff to learn, right? But I think it's really interesting to note certain things hadn't been internalized yet, right? And then later on, I went through CCD, which is, basically Sunday school for Catholics. And, the messages I got there were that, sex is a sin and you shouldn't masturbate either. And you should only really have sex once you're married. But I didn't grow up like in a very, fundamentalist religious type of situation. And so it was really a mixed message because it was sort of, this is what you're supposed to do, wait till marriage, but like 98% of y'all aren't actually doing that. So it's like, okay, that's confusing. And then sex is being used to sell things. Sex is portrayed in art. I remember my mom saying, if it's in art, then it's okay. Then it's not like lewd or whatever. I was like, okay. But then it's also in, sex is in movies and it's something that can be glamorized. It's something that can be romanticized. But at the same time, you're like, okay, it's a sin. This is so confusing. And then I don't think I learned the word vagina till I was like 9. And we just called them private parts in our household. And I think even that idea was like, oh, you're not supposed to talk about these. You're not supposed to like say the word. We have to have like a different word for them. And so I think that for me created a little bit of a sense of, shame or discomfort. And I do see that with a lot of my clients as well. And then, sex education isn't allowed to tell you anything positive about sex in public schools. And so it was all fear mongering. It was like, oh, abstinence is the only solution. And, you can get this disease and you can get that disease and you can get pregnant and like ruin your life. And I kind of had this idea that it was like, really like bad or trashy if you, had sex at a certain age or got pregnant at a certain age. And so it was like, oh, I can't do that. It's also fascinating because when I was a high school counselor, the reverse is true. I think it actually really depends where you grow up and who you're surrounded by. But in a lot of circles of teenagers, there could be kids that are 15 and they're like, oh my God, I haven't lost my V card, right? And I think even that whole idea of virginity or a V card is another thing that we learn, And I think as a woman, you're kind of taught like, oh, don't give it up too easily. Or, back in the day, certainly it's like brides were worth more if they were a virgin. And so there's, some carryovers for that, maybe if people take sex too casually, that's like a bad thing or doesn't mean anything to them, or that it's the same with all their partners because they're just like so chill and casual. And these are just like all assumptions, right? And I had judgment, I had judgment of people who were more sexually active, which is, it's interesting. I became a sex therapist. I've let go of like a lot of that judgment. But I kind of share this too, just to let people know that like, it's okay wherever you're at on your journey. The important thing is like be on the journey, right? Like, I don't think it's any of our faults that we were educated in this way. It's like, this is the culture we grow up in and you can't control that. This is like the way we're conditioned to relate to people. So I think that we are all responsible for solving it though. So it's like, okay, well, we're all here. This is what it is now and it's not working. Yeah. Like, what do we do with those messages? And I think education is so important. Even the fact that you guys are listening to this podcast right now is like, you're on your journey, right? Like you're going to get there and you might not even know where there is, right? Where it's like, we're all kind of along for the ride, which I think is a good thing. And to kind of really drive home the point of, conditioning versus being unconditioned, I watched the funniest video. It was like the cutest thing ever of this panda on Instagram. And it was just, like playful. It was like somersaulting around. And then it kind of like paused and like played with its genitals a little bit and just kind of like looked at them. And then it was like, frolicking and somersaulting more. And it was fascinating for me just to see this like real, like natural kind of like innocence, right? And if you have a pet, my cats lick their butt all the time. So if you have a cat, this is just like a thing, but zero self-consciousness, right? And so I think one of the gifts and the challenges of being a human is that we are conscious. We have this self-awareness. And so that can lead to self-consciousness and, fear of like, how are we being judged? Or like, what's normal? And it goes back to this sense of belonging, like we have to be acceptable. We have to be a certain way to belong. And I think the more we can kind of undo that really in all areas of life, but definitely when it comes to sex, the better, right? This panda didn't know there was anything to be shameful about. It was kind of like, this is a body part, just like all my other body parts. And, maybe this body part feels good to touch, or maybe a different body part feels good to touch. But the idea that there's no shame and it like doesn't occur to this really cute panda, which by the way, I did a duet or stitch or whatever with the panda. So you can check it out on my Instagram. This concept from Buddhism of beginner's mind, it really reminded me of that. It's like, there's something so fresh about this panda just being so playful and comfortable with its body, including its genitals. So that's like a beginner's mind. It's kind of like, oh, I didn't know how you're quote unquote supposed to behave or supposed to do something. And a lot of times when we try something new in life in general, like maybe you're going to try, indoor rock climbing, or maybe you're going to go parasailing. Oftentimes the first time we're just like, oh, wow, because we don't know what to expect. There's no like set of beliefs about this activity or hobby or whatever it is. And we just kind of are like present, right? I kind of joke with myself even that it's like a way of cheating at being present because, I love trying new things in general. I'm sharing that because we've all tried new things before, right? We've all been a beginner. And I'm curious, like, what if, if we're unlearning this sex negativity, some of the negative messages we got around sex, what does that look like? It looks like beginner's mind. It's like we are wiping the slate clean of all of this bullshit, frankly, that we've been taught. And not only like bullshit, I mean, some of it's scientifically accurate, right? So I won't call it all bullshit, but it's very slanted, right? We're kind of given these mixed messages, and then we're given some like kind of slanted messages, and then the government gets involved and tries to control our sex lives and our love lives and who we can marry and, what we can do with our bodies. And there's some law that just passed in Tennessee about you can't have like outdoor drag shows, and it, could be a way to kind of potentially oppress trans people. And it's just like, we have to accept that at the end of the day, we can't control other people. We can put consequences in place. We can set our own boundaries. And like, it's a society. Yeah. I mean, government can do what it wants, but at the end of the day, you still can't control people. And so if we're fighting with reality, if we're fighting that there's people out there that are different than us, people out there that disagree with us, we're going to lose that battle. Like fighting reality, you always lose. So anyway, so if we're able to get to a place of just acceptance, right? And instead of worrying so much about other people, figuring out what do we want? what path do we want to be on? How do we want to be as a sexual being? How do we want to express ourselves as a sexual being? And you can use this panda example to notice, how are you different than the panda? So when I was watching it, I noticed just how unself-conscious the panda was, and also just the level of playfulness and frolicking and, this energy of like freedom. There's something just so joyful about it. And I think that we also, in our efforts to kind of censor ourselves or to like contain ourselves in a neat little box, that, maybe we're losing some of that joy and playfulness. And playfulness is also just such a great quality to bring to sex. I think it's really important to not take ourselves too seriously, especially when we're trying something new, when we're with a new partner, if we're trying to make changes with our existing partner, with our sex life, to, keep that playfulness and not take things too seriously. But notice what comes up for you. I mean, if there's a sense of self-consciousness, or if there's a sense of, oh my God, I would like never touch my genitals ever. And like, what do you make that mean? And so you can also go back through, what were you taught about sex? I would encourage you to do some journaling about it. What were the messages you got from your family? Was it talked about? Was it not? Because sometimes by not talking about it, we also get a message that you're not supposed to talk about sex. And if you bring this up, that's like a bad thing, or you're going to really be stirring the pot and kind of, messing with the whole family dynamic or the whole relationship dynamic. And then we have that fear, right? Because it threatens our sense of belonging, and we're afraid of being rejected, which I talk about in episode 2. One amazing way that I want to share with you guys to address some of these thought patterns that maybe you kind of realize have outlived their usefulness and are no longer really serving you is the self-coaching model from the Life Coach School. And I'm not, being paid to say this or anything. I am in their membership program called Scholars. And I will link to this in the show notes. But basically what you do is look at what's factual versus what is my thought that I'm applying to that factual situation. Because we tend to walk around believing our thoughts as if they're fact. So you might have a thought, a woman shouldn't have more than 5 partners in her lifetime. And if she does, that's immoral, right? And you might be like, okay, I don't really want to have that thought anymore. I'm seeing how it's, a double standard, or I'm seeing how it's judgy or whatever. So the idea is you would then look at, what feeling do I have when I think that thought? And it might be, I feel really judgmental. And then what do you do, when you have that judgmental feeling? And it might be, I think about all the reasons a person shouldn't be behaving the way they're behaving and how I would do it different. And then it would kind of be like, okay, well, when that's what you're doing, what results are you creating for yourself? And it might just be like, I'm kind of in this place of self-righteousness and I feel more distanced from the other person. And then you can see how that actually reinforces your original thought, right? So when we do these thought models, it's actually very deep work. We're actually seeing how we're creating our reality with our thoughts. So I think I've mentioned this potentially in previous episodes, but I really want people to understand that, this applies to your sex life too. We have all these thoughts that might not be serving us. It could be as simple as, I can't bring sex up with my partner. It's going to get weird. And that's not a fact. That's a belief. And the more we have these beliefs, sometimes we try to just push past them with our actions, and we might be like, I'm going to talk to them anyways. But if our belief is still that it's going to be really weird and create distance or a fight or something like that, chances are it will go poorly. You can't sort of out action your thoughts and beliefs because it impacts the energy that we're putting out there, right? And this, I don't want to get too off topic here, but this also goes for, dating or improving your relationship. If you think, my sex life is never going to improve, or I'm never going to find someone who's sexually compatible, that is the reality that you're creating. Even notice some of the thoughts about yourself. So do you have thoughts about, my body should look a certain way in order to be quote unquote sexy? If you have that one, go back to the How to Be Sexy episode. If you are into kink and BDSM and you think like, people are going to think that's weird, or I'm not going to really be able to fully be myself if I don't, meet someone who's already experienced with that, then we're creating our reality in that way. And so by doing these thought models, we're really taking radical responsibility for what beliefs are still lingering, right? And then we can become more intentional about it. So once you've kind of uncovered and you have this awareness of, oh, like I see how my thoughts are creating my reality. I see how this is actually not the reality I want to be creating. And I was kind of doing this on accident, but now that I'm aware, I have an opportunity to be intentional about it. So what do I want to create? How do I want to be thinking? How do I want to feel? Right? I know I've asked that question in previous episodes too. How do I want to feel? And then how do I want to be showing up in terms of my behavior, like what I'm doing, what I'm not doing? Right? And then ultimately, what results am I creating for myself? So regardless, I want to kind of like leave you guys with a message of hope. So like regardless of what you were taught growing up, whatever kind of crap people put in your heads, you're not stuck with it. And I think you know what's serving you and what's not serving you in terms of your thoughts. You know, if the thought is, well, I'm past a certain age, like I'm just, no longer sexual. That's not factual. That's a made up thought, right? And so that's the work between separating out fact from thought. And so highly encourage you guys to do this. Again, the resource is in the show notes. And in order to find the show notes, if you're an Apple Podcast, you might have to go to the little 3 dots on the podcast player and then select that and then there's a section that says go to episode. And then once you're on the episode page, you just scroll down and the show notes are down there and you'll see all the links and you can click right on the link and it'll take you to the self-coaching model. And they have a whole web page that explains how to do it. And then they actually have a little PDF you can print out to get some practice doing it. So check it out, practice some awareness, and just get clear for now on what do you want to unlearn. So thanks for joining, and I will catch you guys next week.